Part 2, Simple Equations. Simplifying math. Most of the time we feel like this when it comes to math. Dear math, I don't want to solve your problems. I have my own to solve. It doesn't have to be that way though. Let's talk about simple equations and how to solve them. When addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division are all used together, it is referred to as an equation. Equations are simply sentences using numbers instead of words. For the math atheist in all of us, it is important to note that equations have a certain order in which calculations are performed. There are two rules to remember. Rule number 1, calculations inside parentheses are completed first. Rule number 2, calculations involving multiplication and division are performed before addition and subtraction. Rounding up numbers. This is a skill that operators will do on a daily basis. It is important to be as accurate as possible, but sometimes it will be necessary to round up. At times on the state test, the answers will be rounded up and you will need to know if your answer is close enough to be correct. Rounding up numbers. There are two easy rules to remember. Numbers 5 or greater are always rounded up. Numbers less than 4 are rounded down. 25.57 becomes 25.6. 23,678 becomes 23,680. How is this done? It will depend upon the task you are completing. For smaller numbers, look at the last digit reading from left to right. Generally, it will be in the hundredths position. Let's look at the next number. 23,678 becomes 23,680. How is this done? Again, it depends upon the task you're completing. For larger numbers, look at the last two digits reading from left to right. Let's look at 78 in the 23,678 number. These numbers are in the tens and ones place value. Let's assume since we are considering rounding a really large number, we will also need to change the number we are comparing from 5 to 50. The number 78 is larger than 50, so we will round 23,678 up to 23,680, which is the next largest number. Let's look at one more number. Sometimes in the wastewater field, you will need to analyze numbers which deal in the millions of gallons. When you begin to work with extremely large numbers, you'll need to work with higher rounding number. We'll look at 50 now. Instead of 50, we'll look at 500 in order to round up or to round down. With a very large number, 2,340,910, we will look at the number 340. It's smaller than 500, so we'll round down to 300. So the answer will be 2,300,000. Let's make it into a decimal now. You can sometimes see the answer written as 2.3 million. Let's look at one more number, 5,219. Let's say we want to round to the nearest hundredth. Let's look at the number 19. What would the answer be? If you said it would round down to 5,200, that is correct. But what if you want to round to the nearest thousand? What would that be? If you said you could round down to 5,000, you would be correct. Let's try one more, just to make sure you're comfortable with this. Round 1,842 to the nearest hundred and the nearest thousand. What would those two numbers be? Round 1,842 to the nearest hundred. $1,800 is the answer. Now the nearest thousand, which would be 2,000. You've been learning about whole real numbers. These are numbers from 1 to infinity. Let's take a look at decimals. They're parts of a number. Here's a graph to help you understand that better. Let's try reading decimals correctly. Try out this number. It's read as 9/10. This is because the 9 is on the right side of the decimal. Now try this number. It's read as 10 2/10. The decimal is read as the whole word, and when you hear this number, you'll know there is a decimal between 10 and 2. Now you try it. Did you read it as 2 and 57/100ths? Did you read this one as 3 and 7/1000ths? Just for a point of reference, sometimes in the field of water or wastewater, you will see millions of gallons per day written as 2.5 millions of gallons per day. You can read this as 2.5 millions of gallons because it just makes more sense to hear it spoken in this manner and visualize the quantity. Using your prior knowledge of rounding, would you round this number up or down to the nearest million? If you said 3.0 mgd, you would be correct. One thing you should know in the water and wastewater field is how to change from percents into decimals and into fractions. 65% is the same thing as 65 divided by 100. Using the percent formula, you can complete the following formula equation. Now we want to divide and find the decimal. $0.65 is the answer. Did you know you could write a decimal as a fraction as well? If you want to convert 50% into a fraction, the first step is to write the percentage as a fraction. So you put the whole number over 100. In this case, it'd be 50. Now you want to convert it into a decimal. You do this by dividing 50 by 100, which gives you 0.5 or 51/100ths. Let's try some of these on your own. Convert 80% into a decimal and 45 hundredths as a percentage, and then 25 hundredths into a fraction. Pause this video in order to write down the problems and solve them. Working with more complex decimals. Working with fractions can be simplified if you change fractions into a decimal form, and use your calculator for this particular procedure. You're now ready to move on to the next lesson, which is basic geometry. Take a short quiz to self-assess for this section.